often enhanced by the fact that the abuser often has all of the economic and social standing and complete control of the family's finances. These survivors' options are further limited by the fact that many who leave often face one or more additional barriers, including having at least one dependent child, not being employed outside the home, possessing no property that is solely theirs, and lacking access to cash, bank, or credit accounts. As a result of all these combined factors, many survivors of domestic violence summon the courage to leave the abusive relationship, eventually to return for financial reasons. When survivors arrive at our shelter, many have few resources other than the clothes they are wearing. Some are burdened with their partner's debt. Still, others tumble into debt after they have left the abusive relationship. So what are we as providers supposed to do in a challenging economy with skyrocketing inflation and a mandate to find housing for our survivors and resources so they can move on with their lives? Today, we will be talking to each other and coming up with solutions to aid our practice and help survivors. I would like to thank the DV Symposium Committee, Michelle Lefkowitz Partners, Lauren Farinas and Colleen Rupert, Union County Prosecutor's Office, Maritza Escuderos, Americans Friends Service Committee, and Dr. Catherine Lynch and Director Lisa Porras from the YWCA and the Family Justice Center. I would also like to thank in advance our keynote speaker, Professor Claire Renzenti from the University of Kentucky, our Housing Crisis Panel. I did the best I could for you, Claire. Linda Flores-Tober from the Elizabeth Coalition, Jeline Donovan from Family Promise, and Julie Sanchez from the YWCA. The next panel on untapped economic opportunities, Michelle Lefkowitz Partners, Zaman Aid, American Friends Service Committee, and Franchelli Inoa from our YWCA STEP program. From the Resources Committee, Janelle Tavares, the American Friends Service Committee, Jennifer Rodriguez from Proceed, Charles Dominguez, and Scott DiNardo from Social Services. So those are my preliminary thank yous. I know you're going to have a great discussion, and now I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Chair Granados.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. As we know, Union County Commissioner Board stands behind the Prosecutor's Office and also the YWCA of Union County, and we thank you both for hosting today's great Zoom session. I am happy to see that so many organizations and partners on this Zoom. Your dedication and commitment to supporting survivors of domestic violence are commendable, and together we form a powerful alliance that can drive substantial change in our communities. By collaborating and pooling our resources, we can create solutions to address the unique challenges faced by domestic violence survivors. The impact of domestic violence extends far beyond the immediate harm inflicted upon individuals and families. It often leads to homelessness, financial instability, and the need for more comprehensive support services. By meeting today, we reiterate our commitment to ensuring that survivors have access to the resources and assistance they need to rebuild their lives and thrive. I ask that each and every one of you to actively engage, as you've done so many times in the past, in discussions amongst these panelists. We can leverage this collaborative expertise to develop a comprehensive approach that encompasses shelters, legal aid, counseling, economic empowerment, and community support. Each of us have the power to make a profound difference in the lives of domestic violence survivors. I extend my deepest gratitude to all the participating organizations and panelists whose commitment and tireless efforts form the foundation of this symposium. Together, we'll continue to lead and empower domestic violence survivors to reclaim their lives and futures. Thank you all for being part of this conversation.
I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Claire Renzeti. Dr. Renzetti is a world-renowned expert on violence against women, where she has studied the issue for over 40 years. She is the author, providing for 1 second, I apologize. I do apologize for that. At this moment, I would like to introduce Prosecutor Danielle, who will now be welcoming everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lauren Farinas, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't appear in front of you via camera. I'm having some technical difficulties with Zoom, but I did want to indicate to you that it's an honor for me to be here today to welcome you to this important event. My name is Bill Daniel, and I have the privilege of serving as the Union County Prosecutor. And I'd like to begin this symposium by thanking our partners in this endeavor, namely Union County through its Board of Commissioners led by Chairman Sergio Granados and the YWCA. For 9 years now, our organizations have joined forces to host an annual symposium on domestic violence. Our symposium aims to bring together all those who serve victims of domestic violence in multiple capacities. Outside of this symposium, Union County, the YWCA, and the Prosecutor's Office, the Union County Prosecutor's Office, partnered to support the community through our collaborative Family Justice Center, which is a resource hub for survivors of domestic violence. All Family Justice Center partners encourage survivors to access support and resources through Union County's 24-hour domestic violence hotline, which is available at 908-355-HELP. That's 908-355-4357. As we all know, domestic violence is a serious problem that can have a devastating impact on survivors, not only physically and emotionally, but also financially. They may be struggling to make ends meet, find a safe place to live, or keep their jobs. In today's trying times, these issues are often exacerbated. Today's incredible lineup of speakers will further educate you on the resources that are available to help our survivors. Speakers and attendees, thank you so much for dedicating time this afternoon to this important conversation. Your participation here is a testament to the support we as a community strive to provide each survivor. And speaking for everyone involved in making this symposium possible, we hope you enjoy today's program. Thank you. Let's proceed onward.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Claire Renzetti. Dr. Renzetti is a world-renowned expert on violence against women, where she has studied the issue for over 40 years. She is the author and editor of 26 books on the topic, and her work has been published in the leading journals such as Violence Against Women, Journals of Interpersonal Violence, and Criminology. Dr. Renzetti is a professor of sociology at the University of Kentucky, where she is also the Judy Conway Creighton Endowed Chair for Studies of Violence Against Women. She is the editor of the peer-reviewed journal Violence Against Women, and she is also the editor of several book series on the subject. Dr. Renzetti's research has focused on experiences of marginalized women and girls who are victims of violence. She has studied the problem of domestic sex trafficking, and she has also conducted research on the effect of religiosity and religious self-regulation on intimate partner violence. Dr. Renzetti is a passionate advocate of victims of violence, and she has worked tirelessly to raise awareness of the issue. She is a member of several professional organizations and has served numerous awards for her research and community service. Dr. Renzetti, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides to share. I can get it to share. There we go. All right. Let's see if it's good. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see the slides, I hope? Thanks so much for inviting me to join you this afternoon. And thank you all for taking on this important issue. On a personal note, I work at the University of Kentucky, and right now I'm in Texas. But I was born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware, and I miss the East Coast a lot. So I'm feeling the connection to New Jersey now. It's great to be with you, even if it's only on Zoom. So we're talking about the economy, and back in January, at the start of the new year, economists were issuing dire warnings that the United States would soon enter a recession. Not all economists and financial analysts agreed with that prediction, but there was nearly unanimous agreement that we would at least experience severe financial hardship during 2023, given that inflation was particularly high at 9%, and the Federal Reserve was systematically raising interest rates, which makes it more difficult for individuals and businesses to borrow money and use credit. Now, for those of us who remember the severe recession that began in 2007 and continued into 2009, this economic outlook was scary, to say the least. During that time, unemployment rates reached their highest levels since the early 1980s. The average length of employment reached its highest level since the federal government began tracking these data in 1948. And the number of home foreclosures rose steeply as well. Many families saw their financial status plummet at that time. And at the same time, domestic violence agencies reported significant increases in calls for service from women who were being abused. And there were media reports of an increase in familicides, with the perpetrator often being a husband father who was distraught over a recent job loss, a foreclosure, or other severe financial problems. As I wrote back then, though, while the data and reports are alarming, the relationship between economic stress and domestic violence is both a complex one and a reciprocal one. That is, while studies show a strong association between economic hardship and DV risk, we also know, and as some of the folks have already said, we also know that domestic violence typically causes serious financial problems for victims and may entrap them in both poverty and an abusive relationship. Now, fortunately, the dire predictions of economists at the start of 2023 have not come to pass, at least not yet. And most financial analysts are quite optimistic about the economy these days. But as economists are fond of saying, no two recessions are alike. And while we may not experience the hardship that occurred between 2007 and 2009, not everyone is experiencing or will experience the so-called soft landing that economists now expect with regard to most families' financial circumstances. So what's going on? Why the confusion? And how does this affect domestic violence services and those of us who work with them in some way? Well, to answer these questions, let me first provide some economic context that I think is most relevant to our concerns here today. And then I'll talk about the implications for serving survivors. So first, the present economy. Why has the country not plunged into a deep recession? Well, one of the factors that appears to be most important in this regard is the unemployment rate, which is now 3.6%, the lowest it's been in almost 50 years. And I know that you specifically are looking at New Jersey. I'm giving you a bigger national overview, but I'll try to relate this to some of the data that was presented in the introduction. If you follow the jobs reports, you've seen that just about every month this year so far, employers have added several 100,000 jobs. In May alone, 339,000 jobs were added, almost double what economists had expected. 83.4% of people aged 25 to 54, which are considered the prime workforce years, are now in the labor force, which is the highest percentage since 2007. And not only that, but to attract and retain workers, especially in the service sector, wages have gone up. So for the second quarter of 2023, average weekly earnings were 5.7% higher than they were in May of 2022. In fact, wages have gone up faster than prices. The consumer price index rose by 4% during that same period. And so what that means is that families with at least one wage earner, at least many families with at least one wage earner in the household, can buy more with the wages that person earns. The other thing that happened was inflation came down. The inflation rate last month was only 3%. That's still higher than what the Federal Reserve likes. They want it to be 2% or less, which is why, according to them, they raised interest rates again yesterday by another 0.25%. But 3% is much, much better than the 9% we saw just 7 months ago. So all this is great news, right? Of course it is. But like anyone who analyzes data for a living, I'm going to take the role of the wet blanket and tell you about some of the exceptions to this great news. So while unemployment is low, it's not uniformly low across all economic sectors or social groups. Healthcare, hospitality, and business service sectors have fairly consistently added thousands of jobs over the past year. But other sectors, especially manufacturing, have seen job losses. The manufacturing sector has a high number of blue-collar employees and a higher percentage of male than female employees. At the same time, we continue to see significant differences in unemployment rates by race, ethnicity, and sex. And you can see some of those differences in this table. Now, let me just say that it's important to keep in mind when looking at this table that I'm using Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and these are the only racial and ethnic groups for which they now provide data. So there are groups that are missing, such as Native Americans and Alaska Natives. And these groupings that they use are very broad, and there are often large differences among racial and ethnic subgroups. So we need to keep that in mind when we look at these kind of data. But let's see what the table can tell us about unemployment. We see first that the unemployment rate in the second quarter of 2023 for white people and for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders was 3%. In contrast, the unemployment rate for Black and Latinx people was 5.4% and 4.0% respectively. Even more important, perhaps, the unemployment rate for Black Americans actually rose in this second quarter by almost a full percentage point. We can also see in this table the intersection of race and sex. Women in every racial ethnic group have a lower unemployment rate than men, except for Latinx people. Now, think about that. We want women to be employed, but there's a couple of things that explain this lower unemployment rate. One is what the unemployment rate, how the unemployment rate is defined and calculated. It refers to people who are out of work, but are actively looking for a job, okay? Many women have removed themselves from the labor force completely and are not looking for a job, okay? And this has increased since COVID. And so there are lower unemployment rates doesn't necessarily mean that women are doing better. In addition, remember, it's the service sector, retail, sales, hospitality, maintenance, housekeeping, those sectors have increased a great deal. And in terms of jobs available, they employ more women than men, okay? And they also pay less, which we'll talk about next, which is the gender wage gap. In this slide, we see the wage gap by race and ethnicity and sex so far for 2023. Women overall earn less than men. They earn about 82 cents for every dollar a man makes. And this ratio hasn't changed in 20 years. But there are important differences by race and ethnicity. So white women earn almost 85% as much as white men. Black women earn almost 90% as much as Black men. Asian and Pacific Islander women earn 81% as much as Asian and Pacific Islander men. And Latinx women earn 88.3% as much as Latinx men. So the gender gap looks smaller for Black and Latinx women and men than for white and Asian and Pacific Islander women and men. But if we look at within sex group differences across racial and ethnic categories, we see that this narrower wage gap is due primarily to the fact that Black and Latinx people earn less than white and Asian and Pacific Islander people. And that's what this next slide shows. So Black men earn 81.2% as much as white men. Black women earn 86.3% as much as white women. Latinx men earn 74.3% as much as white men. Latinx women earn 77.6% as much as white women. The average earnings of Asian and Pacific Islander men and women, though, are higher than the average earnings of white men and women. Now, as I noted before, though, it's important to remember that the BLS uses very broad racial categories that don't account for differences among subgroups. So if we were to break it down by subgroup, there are some subgroups of Asian and Pacific Islanders who earn very, very high incomes, but other groups, especially more recent immigrants, earn much lower incomes. The impact of the racialized gender gap in wages is especially stark when you compare women of color with only white men. According to the National Partnership for Women and Families, if a Latina was paid the same as a white man for equivalent work, she would have enough money to buy 38 months of food, almost 33 more months of childcare, and she'd have 2 years of rent. If a Black woman was paid the same as a white man for equivalent work, she would have enough money to buy 30 months of food, more than 25 more months of childcare, and 1.5 years more of rent. Okay, so despite the good news in the economy, the outcomes have not been as good for some groups as for others. And what does this mean in terms of domestic violence? Well, as I've said many times, and as some of you have said today, although we often say that domestic violence affects individuals in all social classes, and certainly wealth does not immunize someone from abuse, research consistently shows a strong relationship between socioeconomic status and a woman's risk for victimization, no matter how you measure that. So some studies have shown, for instance, that as financial status of a family increases, the risk or likelihood of DV decreases. Another way to look at it is in terms of how well one's household income meets one's family's needs. So as the ratio of household income to need goes up, that is, the more money you have to meet your needs, the risk or likelihood of DV goes down. And as the National Crime Victimization Survey has consistently shown us, and that survey uses a large nationally representative sample of women and men, DV rates are 5 times greater in households with the lowest annual incomes than in households with the highest annual incomes. Now, some observers have argued that to some extent these findings are an artifact of wealthier women's ability to seek help privately if they are abused, and therefore to keep the abuse more secret, that they don't show up in a lot of these statistics. They seek help from their personal health care provider. They stay with family and friends who have the resources to allow them to stay for extended periods of time if necessary. Or they can go to a hotel, or they can afford to rent an Airbnb or VRBO. And poor women don't have that option. That is all true, but the fact remains that economic hardship, while it may not always cause domestic violence, it almost certainly worsens the situation of poorer women whose partners begin to abuse them or have been abusing them for some time. As I just said, it means they have fewer alternatives. Poorer women do seek help from family and friends, but it's important to keep in mind that those family members are also likely to be experiencing precarious financial circumstances. So their ability to support and house an abused family member and her children for more than a brief period of time may be severely constrained. Women who don't have family and friends who can take them in, or who can only assist them very temporarily, will go to a homeless shelter or to a battered women's shelter. Some studies have shown more than 20% of DV survivors combine informal help from family and friends with help from formal help providers, such as a shelter. And this is especially true for housing assistance. As providers, you may in fact see the need for shelter increase in the months ahead if you haven't already, because the housing market right now is so tight and so expensive. The National Association of Realtors reported just last week that although inflation is shrinking and prices for many goods and services are coming down, the cost of housing has actually been going up and remains very expensive. The median price of a single family home is now, and this is nationally, in your part of the country, I bet it's much higher, $413,800. Nationally, that is the second highest median price ever recorded. At the same time, because interest rates keep going up, it's more difficult and more expensive to get a mortgage. And the rising expense of housing isn't limited to housing purchases. Rental housing has also gone up. Rental prices have increased 26% since the start of the pandemic in March 2020. And that's nationally. Again, in your part of the country, I know it's gone up even more. So that means that women who are experiencing abuse, who wish to leave their partners, have more limited options. And it also means that service providers and advocates to whom they go for help will have a more difficult time rehousing these women and their children and helping them find a stable, affordable place to live. So how can we help? Well, I've been doing this work for more than 40 years, and I still don't have the answers, but I can make suggestions, I can make recommendations based on my observations and my conversations with providers and advocates. First, I think it's really important that service providers in a wide variety of sectors, welfare, healthcare, legal advocacy, housing, and domestic violence, have a collaborative working relationship that recognizes the interconnections among the various problems that they each address. You're doing that today. That's what this is about. What I ask is that you think about who isn't here today, who needs to be brought into this collaboration, who needs to join in a partnership with all of you. We talk a lot about wraparound services, about coordinated community responses. Sometimes it's really hard to put these into practice, especially if funding for services is cut and agencies and organizations have to compete with one another for resources. Nevertheless, it's these types of interagency, interorganization collaborations and partnerships, often reinforced by a formal memorandum of agreement and reciprocity, that are desperately needed to meet the needs of survivors. I'm also an advocate for something that's a little bit more controversial, and that's universal DV screening of clients who present for social services and healthcare services. I know some people don't like universal screening, but I think that done well, it can have positive outcomes. Now, what I mean by done well, is a couple of things I mean. I mean that all agency, healthcare organization staff, from the top, from administrators to supervisors to frontline staff, have been trained in best practices for DV screening, that they recognize and acknowledge domestic violence as a serious, widespread problem, that they're motivated to respond sensitively and empathically, and that they have the ability, they are prepared to make referrals to other needed services. Many agencies and organizations now have screening tools available, but staff feel very uncomfortable using them. They feel uncomfortable asking people about their relationships, about whether they're experiencing domestic violence. Every time my healthcare provider asks me if anyone's hurting me at home or in a relationship, I thank her. And she just laughs. And I always say, I really want you to know how important it is that you've asked me that question. If the question isn't asked, we miss important opportunities to provide assistance to abused women and their children. Universal screening also has the advantage of demarginalizing the poor. Although DV appears to be more prevalent among lower income women, it's not only a problem of lower income women. And universal screening means that lower income women aren't singled out. And that helps break down stereotypes about both poverty and domestic violence, and all women benefit. Now, I said I'm a general supporter, or in general supportive of universal screening, but I have another caveat to that support. One of the problematic aspects of screening, even when the screener is empathetic and sensitive, is women's fear, especially among women living in poverty and lower income women, that if they disclose abuse, they may trigger an automatic report to child protection authorities, with the potential result that they'll lose custody of their children. For example, the state where I work, Kentucky, had a mandatory requirement of reporting DV committed by spouses, but interestingly, not dating partners, when it was disclosed to us up until 2017. So if a married person disclosed to me in my role as an educator, essentially employed by the state because I work at a state university, I was mandated to call the state cabinet for health and family services and report that. And then staff at the cabinet were supposed to launch an investigation into the person's circumstances. Not surprisingly, this inhibited many victims from disclosing to people like me who could potentially help them. I lecture about domestic violence in my courses. And so it always happens that someone will come up to me, starting with the sentence, "Never told anybody this before," okay? And right away, up until 2017, I had to stop them and say, I have to tell you that if you disclose to me, I'm mandated to report it. That's a horrible feeling because you feel like you're shutting people down. We also found that even when reports were made to the cabinet, and there were about 40,000 reports a year, less than 50% resulted in an investigation because the staff often couldn't locate victims. So the law that was supposed to help domestic violence victims get services, that was the argument for putting it in place, to a large extent failed in that regard. In June of 2017, though, the mandatory reporting law was replaced by a mandatory information and referral requirement, so that anyone who discloses abuse, married or not, is now given educational materials related to domestic violence and dating violence. They're given information about how to access regional domestic violence programs and/or rape crisis centers, and how to access protection orders. And the list of people who are mandated to provide this information is very long, but school personnel, educators are among that group. I've always kept this information on hand, but now it's great to know that others have to have it too. So I support universal screening then, as long as you're not in a place that would jeopardize the safety and security of the person who discloses, or put them in another type of jeopardy, such as having to deal with CPS. Now, on my big wish list for things to do would be the construction of high quality, low cost public housing and the creation of high quality, low cost, or free childcare. And when I say those things, I'm often met with eye rolls and mumbles of dream on. I can't hear you saying it because you're muted, but this is what happens sometimes when I say this. And okay, they may be pie in the sky, but I still think we have to fight for them, that we have to lobby for them, that we have to be visible and vocal about the need for them so that we can better represent and advocate for women who experience abuse. DV advocates, housing advocates, anti-poverty advocates, public health advocates, everyone who encounters and serves battered women and their children, including researchers and educators like me, need to lobby together as a coalition for policies and resources that help women become financially stable and independent while having access to the services they need to address all of the serious problems in their lives. Lobbying and educating businesses and employers is also important, not just politicians, but businesses and employers. And one way to do it is to appeal to their bottom line. Studies show that DV-related injuries to women cost about $5 billion a year in medical expenses and lost productivity. And about half of this cost is borne by the private sector in the form of health insurance payments and sick leave. Employers need to be educated about how dangerous it is for them to support a batterer by, say, posting bail for that individual or testifying as a character witness on their behalf in court, or by simply looking the other way if they become aware that one of their employees is abusing an intimate partner or is being abused by an intimate partner. There are many formal and informal things that employers can do to promote the safety and well-being of their employees. And these things are beneficial to all employees. I just learned the other day that my partner, who is a banker, has an employee whose husband burned all of her clothes, took all of her clothes and set them on fire. She had no clothes to go to work. And so what he did with his HR officer was go out and buy her a new wardrobe and provide her with clothing. And they also stationed a plainclothes police officer at the bank branch where she worked. Those are really simple things that made a tremendous difference in a person's life, in a battered woman's life. And it's something other employers can easily do if they know that, if they're told, do this. This is helpful. Here's a whole bunch of things you can do. Finally, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but we also have to listen carefully to survivors when they tell us what they need and want and wish, because their needs, wants, and wishes won't be the same across all survivors. Typically, though, they include tangible support in the form of food, stable and affordable housing, and financial and employment assistance. Emotional support and psychological counseling are critically important, but at the end of the day, survivors say they most want help in identifying and securing financial assistance, safe and reliable childcare, safe and reliable transportation, a job or educational assistance, and safe housing. Then they tell us, I can get my life together. And the emotional support and the psychological counseling will be very beneficial. There have been several tools developed to help survivors achieve greater financial stability. Many of you are probably familiar with the Allstate Foundation's Moving Ahead curriculum. It's really very good. This curriculum is designed to help survivors become financially secure and independent by teaching them about things like budgeting, managing debt, and improving credit. It's intended to be an educational tool used by DV advocates at their agencies with survivors who come to them. But survivors can use the curriculum on their own as well. It can be downloaded for free from the Allstate Foundation website, which I've posted here on the slide. Let me conclude by saying that we know that whether this country is in a recession or not, survivors of abuse are typically navigating a very precarious financial situation anyway, while simultaneously trying to protect themselves and their children. By coming here today, we're using our creative, financial, and political will to help them do both of those things. Thank you again for inviting me to speak with you today, but thank you most importantly, for the transformative work that you do every day. Thank you. Is there time for questions? I can stop sharing my screen. If there's time for questions, I'll answer them. I know there's only like 4 minutes left. I apologize for that. I also can't stay for the rest of the symposium because I have a family member in the hospital. So I'm going to be going back to the hospital. But if there is time, I'm happy to answer questions, or people can simply email me.
Dr. Renzetti, thank you so much. Yes, please, if there are any questions, we did have one question in the chat when you were discussing wages between men and women.
Yeah.
The question was, what about Lilly Ledbetter Act that President Obama signed in 2009?
Yeah, so that there have been, that's not the only law, okay? There have been a number of laws to improve or narrow the wage gap overall, okay? And the question becomes then, the major question for employers, most employers have interpreted equal pay for equal work to mean the same job, okay? But each job has various characteristics. And so what counts as equal work is often interpreted very differently because the job descriptions are different. So it goes much deeper. It goes to the job description itself and what the responsibilities and work tasks are and how they are intrinsically valued. Because the work that women have typically done has been devalued. It's been seen as a part of what women do, and that's less valuable than what men do. The types of jobs that women do in the service sector, for example, have always been considered less important, less valuable than the jobs that men do, because those jobs are often seen as an extension of women's work, which is really terrible. So the law, as it's written, is important, but the law as it's enforced can be very, very different, or the law, what I like to call the law in action. There have been a number of laws, and that's why the wage gap has narrowed. I mean, the wage gap used to be much, much wider. I think early on, it was like 65 cents to $1. And everybody was all excited when we got to 74 cents to the dollar. And now we're like up to 82. Wow. But that hasn't changed in 20 years, right? So that's really, really problematic. And much of it has to do with the jobs that men and women typically are funneled into. I want to add as well, though, that sex isn't the only thing to look at. That's why I put race and ethnicity there. And as I said, those were very broad categories. If you can break it down even further, you see huge disparities by race and ethnicity. And many, many analysts argue that race and ethnicity are more important than sex in terms of the wage gap, that there is that double jeopardy of racial ethnic discrimination, of racism, and that compounds the problem of sexism. So you can't just look at the wage gap between women and men. You have to look at it in terms of race as well.
Thank you so much.
I answered the question.
Thank you. We do have one additional question. There is a participant that says that they're from Kentucky and went to the UK. I know patrons very well. Do you work with the TBI fund like we do here in New Jersey with Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey?
Not that I know of. I personally do not. I'm trying to think. I believe in the College of Medicine, in the Department of Behavioral Sciences. I believe that there are individuals there who do work on traumatic brain injury. TK Logan, I think, is one of them. But I do not do that work personally.
Thank you so much. If anybody else have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. This is for now and for the rest of the symposium.
And please feel free to email me. I'm happy to get emails from anyone and discuss things further after the symposium.
I'm just going to give them like maybe 1 minute to see, maybe they're just typing in last minute questions.
Mhm.
Alrighty. If not, well then thank you so much, Dr. Renzetti, for
Thank
joining
you.
us
I'm
today.
sorry I can't stay for the rest. I really wanted to hear everybody else's presentations, but this just happened 2 days ago. So I'm kind of in the thick of it right now.
Of course, we are so sorry, and we hope that things do get better for the family
Thank
member.
you. Thanks
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Thank you. Okay, and at this moment, if you can please help me welcome CRT Coordinator Gabrielle Prasad.
Hi, everyone. I will be moderating panel 1, the impact of current housing crisis on victims of domestic violence. And our panelists are Linda Flores Tauber of Elizabeth Coalition. As a longtime resident of Elizabeth, Linda's local knowledge has been invaluable in her 29 years at the Coalition. Linda's impressive collection of awards shows her absolute dedication to honoring the homeless population in Union County. Jillian Donovan, A Family Promise. Jillian Donovan has over 20 years of experience in nonprofit management and development. And for the past 9 years, she has been employed as the executive director for Family Promise Union County. Considering herself a social justice warrior, her passion for serving people in need shines through her work. And last but not least, there's Julie Sanchez of the YWCA Emergency Shelter. Julie is the Director of Residential Services for the YWCA and has a BA in Criminal Justice with a minor in Corrections and is currently graduating with her MSW in August of this year. She has been in the social services field for over 6 years. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Would you like us to start?
Yes, please. I know that you and
Okay, I have a, we can share a screen with,
Yeah.
if I'm able to. Can anybody see this?
Not yet.
Okay, I did my share screen, but maybe you have to give me permission.
Yes, I think you have to be the host.
You'll have to, I'll get out of it and you can make me, give me permission.
I think Melanie. I'm not
Yes.
sure who's the host.
The share screen should be at the bottom of your Zoom that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So you just click on that.
Okay, hold on. How about now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Okay, hold on a moment. Well, you can see it, right? I can't seem to get to my, okay. It's not the full screen, but this will do. Okay, how did you want us to start? Just start the discussion?
Yep, you can jump right in.
Okay, so I'm Jolene from Family Promise, and of course there's Linda and Julie, and we were going to talk about some trends that we've seen in housing. And obviously, we all know, and I'm just going to start by saying at Family Promise, we do emergency shelter and we do rapid rehousing prevention. We're very lucky that we provide some shelter diversion services too, thanks to the commissioner and other people who have contributed funding to us for that. And in our emergency shelter, we are seeing the trend that it's very hard to get people. I'm sure in your domestic violence shelter too, Julie, you've seen this. The length of stay has become quite long. We used to have a 30 to 90 day length of stay, and now the length of stay is more like 6 months. And because of the shrinking low-income housing stock, and even when you have a Section 8 voucher or rental assistance, the landlords are not too keen on renting to folks with that because they can get over FMR. And so we really have to do a lot to help our families get into housing. I'm going to let Linda and Julie speak about some of the other points on the screen here.
Well, I think one thing that we have to understand is that the landlords don't have like a system that they use. And it really, when we talk about low income, we're talking about workers. So people who you see in the stores, who provide services, people in the nursing homes, people who work not necessarily as teachers, but teaching assistants, all your ancillary personnel. The entire working class cannot afford to live in New Jersey right now. And what landlords have done is they have, when it says they're not always willing to rent to households with Section 8 or any kind of rental assistance, what they've done is they've raised their rents so far above, well, the whole market rent is so far above fair market rent, which is what we're required to, which is what the, our grants don't allow us to pay more than fair market rent. That it's impossible to find anything. Fair market rent is $1,606 in this area of the Elizabeth area, Newark area, and the average rent for a 2-bedroom is about $2,200 a month, I would say, is the average 2-bedroom that we're finding. Add on the layer of the trifecta that our landlords do. Number one, they demand that your income be 3 times the rent. So if it's $2,200, that means someone has to have a monthly income of $6,600. And we'll talk more about what the average income is for working class folks. The other thing they demand is that you have a credit score of 650 or greater. And some are now asking for 700. So that just, I think people who own houses have significantly lower credit ratings, but when you're looking to rent, they demand that your credit be that good. And it's difficult. I mean, people are still recovering from the recession. And the last thing they look at is the history of evictions. I don't think most people know is that when you're evicted from an apartment, that is a lifetime sentence. That is on your record for the rest of your life. So if you've lost an apartment with your buddies back in when you were in your 20s, and now you're in your 40s and you're trying to find an apartment, you and your children, that's held against you still. Now, some landlords do look at this stuff individually and kind of weigh it, but what we find are most landlords, many landlords now use an algorithm online, and so all they get is a score, and they may not even know that you had a history of eviction. And they just say, oh, sorry, you have a 60 and you have to have an 85 in order for us to rent to you. And they send you off packing. So that's a problem. Sometimes our folks have to pay for this background check. And then what happens, they just wasted $65, $85. So it's an ongoing issue.
And let me add, Lynn, to what Linda's saying about the fee that they have to pay. It's not just that. Now there's people need thousands of dollars to get into an apartment, not just the security deposit, because realtors have gobbled up all the available housing. And we have just worked with a lot of clients recently where they don't only have to pay their tenant realtor fee, which could be $1,000 or the monthly rent. They are also being asked to pay the landlord's realtor's fee. That's another $2,500. And then many times they're also asked to pay a landlord incentive fee in addition to that. So the fees are extraordinary. And I think there's actually a bill, I think the Biden administration is putting forth something to get rid of these exorbitant fees, these junk fees, I think they call them. So we have to keep our eye on that. And then the other issue is habitability with the lower rent apartments. Which we've all seen that too. We've actually had families move into some terrible places just because that was the only thing that was available to rent. With the eviction moratorium, we saw so many landlords, once they got paid, once the COVID funding stopped and they got their back rent, they didn't renew the lease and we lost low-income housing. We lost more low-income units because they raised the rent. Julie, do you have anything to add?
Yes, adding to what you guys were saying, I think that even though landlords do not directly deny clients, they do not directly deny clients because of, is this me? Can you guys hear me right? Yes.
It's a little reverb.
Yeah, I know, there's like a background noise in the back. Sure what it is. The landlords do not directly deny the clients because they are using a government program or anything like that, but they do find other ways to still deny them, just because of other reasons. But everything that you guys said is 100% right.
Right. I'm going to go on to the next slide.
Oh,
go ahead, Linda.
Because people can pay cash up front. And
Right.
that's a problem. If you don't have cash up front, you're depending on an agency giving you assistance, which is a process and sometimes could take, a month.
Right.
Landlords are not willing to wait, and so they'll take the cash that the person has in their hand right there.
And let's just say the shrinking housing stock is also due to natural disasters that we experienced in Elizabeth in 2021 with Hurricane Ida. We lost 355 units of beautiful housing that was only built a few years before that, but now it's in a floodplain and we lost those units. So the trend, even though we're so short of housing, we're losing housing. And the next slide we wanted to show, I'm sorry that I can't get into my top taskbar to make this a full screen. So anyway, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, they put out a couple of wonderful reports each year on affordable homes. And the GAP report shows a shortage. And one of the things that they said that 26% of renter households are extremely low income. And this is just for New Jersey. So in New Jersey, there's 23,000 and change of extremely low income renters in New Jersey. And the second line, I think, is the most important one because New Jersey has a shortage of 224,531 rental homes for extremely low income renters. So when Julie and Linda and I and our staff, we're going crazy looking for units for our families, they're just not out there. They're just not out there. And a maximum income for a 4-person extremely low income is $33,060. In New Jersey, you need $69,670 to afford a 2-bedroom rental. I'm going to I'm sure most of you, because a lot of you are in the business, we wanted to put up there what the income limits are. So go down to the bottom on extremely low income, 30%, the $350. That is just impossible to afford anything.
To afford rent, just to add to what you're saying, but then there's utilities that you have to pay on a monthly basis. There's other things that you still have to pay. And it's literally impossible to do it with that income.
Right. And then people give up food and things like that. So this one, and I'm going to turn it over to Linda after this. This one I thought was a very valuable graphic because for every 100 households, it shows how many units there are. So at the extremely low income level, for every 100 households, there's only 33 units. And that's really all the clients that we serve are in the extremely low income bracket. Next, at 50% AMI, at that level, there's only 55 units for every 100 households. And then at 80%, it's better when it give up to the higher income amounts. But these are the two areas of the clients that we work with, and how we can see how it is really such a struggle. I'm going to go to this next screen because most extremely low income households are in the labor force. That's why I really like this graphic. 35% are in the labor force. 30% are seniors. And we all know that seniors have a very hard time finding housing too. 18% are disabled, 11% are other. But I think it's very significant that 35% are in the workforce, and they just can't find housing. There's another great report Linda's going to talk about that the National Coalition puts out of reach.
Yes, that's the out of reach report. And I'm going to also compare a little bit with the out of reach report that the Housing Community Development Network of New Jersey puts out, because it says the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the area where it says most expensive areas, you don't see Union County mentioned. But believe me, we're nestled right in the middle of it all, and our rents aren't any better. And so, you know, in Union County, you do need to have an income of about $33 an hour in order to afford a market rate 2-bedroom apartment. Yet the minimum wage is $14 and the average renter wage is $24. So you can see that they're the income is well below. And this is working class people. These are the people you see every day, like if that song goes, the people in your neighborhood. And so, you know, if workers can't afford to live in the area, imagine if they are on some kind of public assistance, such as senior citizens. We're seeing more seniors on fixed incomes than we have ever seen in my 33 years here. The next slide is all the kind of illustrates the various incomes. So when you look at your waitresses and waiters, their average income is $14.27 an hour. That's less than half of what you need to rent an apartment. People who are administrative assistants even don't quite make the mark. Yet to afford 1 bedroom, you need $23 an hour. Healthcare is the largest employer in Union County, and yet they do not earn enough to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And most people need a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. So it's really become, you know, out of reach is well stated. You know, if we can't afford to, you know, we've really come to the point we cannot afford to shelter our workers, and we cannot afford to shelter those who are disabled and those who are seniors.
Julie, were you going to say
fair market rent?
Right.
Is this one of mine? Yeah. So fair market rent is basically set by HUD. And that is when you get grants to pay rental assistance, or if you're going to go on Section 8, this is the maximum rent that you're allowed to rent for, understanding that they pay 1/3 of their income to contribute to it. But that doesn't matter if you can't find an apartment at $1,606 for a 2-bedroom. So what happens is we're seeing people who are losing those precious vouchers because they can't find any place to live. And I know for a fact that Jillian has spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to fix up apartments that were affordable because they were at fair market rent. So a family could move in, and working family with 2 incomes.
And I'm going to just say my usual comment, Linda, and at this point, we do everything short of prostitution to get the families into these apartments.
And I won't let you do that.
No.
But anyhow, but the thing, so that is, you know, the issue is that there are no more. The other thing that impacts all of this is that a lot of places that were like we called mom and pop, where family owned, had a 2-unit house, and they lived on the first floor. Those are rapidly disappearing because investors from Wall Street have discovered the wonders of renting, and they see this as perpetual income. meaning that they're buying up all these 2 families and 3 families and raising it well above fair market rent and making the whole community unaffordable and basically putting people out of housing.
Linda, I wanted to explain, one of us explained this one too, how there's the small cities, you know, the FMR can go up in different places. And even though HUD sets the rates for Section 8 vouchers for the city of Elizabeth and all of the programs that we serve, these are rates that are higher for some of these towns. Because you can go up to 110% of the fair market rent. I don't know if you wanted to talk any more about that, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, it does help some of our folks to move in that area, but then you're going to hit your head against other issues because they're going to screen them very closely for credit rating and other items like that, because it's still legal to discriminate on other, you know, they have other ways of not taking people on vouchers. And, you know, a lot of it is because many of them are people of color who are moving into these very white neighborhoods. And so the issue is how can, you know, they look for ways to screen out the folks. A lot of times they just might say, well, we don't have anything available now. As soon as they hear you have a Section 8 certificate.
I wanted to, I thought it was good for us to show this information about the fair market rent because HUD is always looking at calculating their philosophy, how they calculate fair market rent. And, you know, people have to get involved with that. You have to get involved at your state legislative level, at the HUD level, and you really have to campaign because fair market rent is not fair market rent. and it's really sad that we're able to get some of our families Section 8 vouchers and other rental assistance, but as the 3 of us know, the deadline comes and goes and then they lose it. So this is one area where where people can help us with this. Another thing that you had asked us when we were all 3 of us getting together for this is how have we helped with this situation? And the things that are listed here, all of us has helped. I'm going to let you 2 talk first, Julie and Linda.
Well, I have to say that, you know, one of the ways to preserve affordable housing where people are living in it is to provide them with homeless prevention assistance, which we call back rent. And because that keeps people in their housing, they don't become homeless and they don't have to go on this like quest to find some place that that is at fair market rent. So it's really important that we continue to be funded for homeless prevention money so that we can keep people in their housing.
I'm going to add to that. I think that one of the most important things that we have to do with you know, everyone is educate them, and specifically when it comes to location. As you said, Janine, you know, on the PowerPoint that you had before, not everywhere is the same brand, and not necessarily. Can you guys hear me right? I can still hear that in the background.
We can hear you. It's a little reverby.
Yes. Okay. So housing search and location, the one of the things that you have listed there, it's very important that we speak to our survivors, we speak to our clients to educate them on, you know, how there's different rent requirements in different places, and not everywhere that they want to specifically go and that they feel the most comfortable at. It's where they if they have a program or if they have income or what, you know, it's gonna meet their needs, if that makes sense. We just want to make sure that we educate them and tell them and you know, advocate for them with the landlords as well as brokers, to remind them the population that we serve and the way that they can help the survivors as well.
Advocacy is everything. You're absolutely right, Julie, with everybody, with, you know, with all the families we serve with our emergency shelter and all the others, 50% do have DV background. Because as Claire said, you know, they all fall into a lot of them into the low income category, extremely low income category. And whatever way we can educate all of the families with how to present themselves. I mean, you have to get that upper edge that to help the families. And I think that all of us, all we agencies, we also have to have flexible funds available so that we can pay those extra fees on behalf of the families. It's really unfortunate that that's the market we're in right now, that it costs a lot of extra money to get people into housing.
Yeah, and not into moving to another apartment, moving into an apartment, it's very expensive nowadays.
Right.
So having that extra help and those incentives, and we as provider being able to help them with that, it really helps our population.
And we have to all get involved with the creation of low-income housing. Linda, you've done some of that.
I was about to jump in. You know, there are many social service agencies are looking to create low-income housing. I will tell you that we depend a lot on grants from HUD, and they make it very difficult to do that. Also, the towns are not very open. We get a lot of NIMBYism about the creation of low-income housing. And so often they'll put you in an area or give you a piece of property that is frankly almost impossible to build on. So that's a big issue. But we all, you know, our goal is to build 50 units in 5 years. That's really a drop in the bucket. But if everybody threw a drop in the bucket, we could make a difference. And if landlords could just take fair market rent for one apartment, I don't think it would lower their income so much that they could help one family. So we all can do a little bit of something. And as I said, if we all threw a drop in a bucket, we'd have a full bucket. But we need to create low-income housing, and we need to create the demand. I don't think that our politicians and the state has heard it loudly enough, that it's not because the folks don't know how to look for housing, don't know how to advocate for themselves to get the housing. The problem is there's not enough low-income housing.
Right. And I wanted to add, after what Linda had done, we too in Family Promise are helping to create low-income housing in a very different way, because we partner with congregations in Union County, and we have a program called we're doing Compassionate Housing Solutions, and we are partnering with our congregations to retrofit their properties and their buildings and the space they don't use anymore into low-income housing. We have an almost completed project in New Providence with St. Andrews. And we have 2 apartments in that regard right now that graduates from our emergency shelter program moved into, and we are master leasing with them. We have a 3rd one on the way, and it's really interesting. Linda has the goal of 50 units, and so does this project that we're working with in New Providence. They want to build, this Father Gunn who heads it up and partners with us, he would like to provide 42 low-income units. And we are in conversations with other congregations in our network to also retrofit their space into low-income housing. So, you know, we may be little, but we're mighty, and we all come up with very innovative solutions. And I swear, I'm looking at this screen here, and I left something very important off of here with the commissioner here. I should be just shelter diversion. We have done shelter diversion, and that keeps people out of the experience of having to be in a shelter. But shelter diversion works best when we have an availability of housing, because you want to divert someone from shelter very quickly. And another part of shelter diversion that we do is we help people relocate to friends or family or other parts of the country. And so in that regard, we're helping to preserve housing in a sense too, because we're helping families with family mediation, getting back together. I mean, we have so many creative and innovative ways that we can help this, and we just have to all work on it together. We also
I have to agree with you, Jillian. Just going back to that last slide that you had.
Yep.
Diversion and diverting the client into going to a family member, a friend, not only helps with housing, but it also helps with their mental health. It helps with whether they are gonna be they're gonna feel later on, how they're going to react, how they're going to overcome the situation that they're in. So that's pretty important.
That's a really good point, Julie, because so many times when people have destroyed their connections or lost their connections, that's what causes their homelessness. And if we can reignite those connections, you are so right. It just is.
Yeah, they need that extra support is definitely needed when you're going through a situation like that.
And there's another nonprofit in Central Jersey called Home Sharing, which some of you might have heard about. And that's with they vet the homeowner and they vote the person that wants to share their home. And they've been doing some great work for 30 years. And that's another area that we can look into.
That helps some seniors keep their housing, their home that they own.
Exactly.
And help another family. Our transitional housing creates common space for that very reason, so that people can have, they have a situation in common that they can help each other, and
right.
it works out well.
Another thing I wanted to mention is at Family Promise, because of the pandemic, we had to change from our congregate shelter program, and now we do scattered site emergency shelter apartments throughout Union County. And that has been such an amazing outreach to landlords who have gotten to know families who are extremely low income, who they would have never taken a chance on before. So many times when a family has lived at our emergency shelter apartment, the landlord's like, wow, this family's pretty cool. And they take out the garbage and everything. We're going to rent to them. On paper, we would have never rented to them. So it's all of that too, getting out in the community, making the landlords our partners as best we can. And we actually, I think you do too, Linda, we help landlords maintain their apartments. Linda referred to the $10,000 client before, and it's a mutual, we've worked on this case together. It's actually 11,000, but this young man, this is a really good example though. It was a young man who was referred to us from the coalition because Linda and they had helped him for many years, and 3 children. They came into our shelter program. They received a Section 8 voucher. And as everybody talked about today, it was coming to the deadline. They were going to lose that voucher. And we were like, oh my goodness, we can't have them lose this voucher. And the only apartment that was actually available or that would rent to them had a major fail from the Section 8 inspector. I've never seen a complete fail before. It was pages and pages of everything that had to be done. So we have private funding for situations like this, not a lot, but a little. And we decide, okay, we're gonna help the landlord make all the fix here. And so we did what we could. We put a crew in, and it failed again. So we had to put the crew in again. We actually contributed $4,600 to fix that apartment so that they wouldn't lose that voucher, because they had the paperwork had gone in with that apartment. And if they didn't get into that apartment, they were going to lose the Section 8 voucher. So we had to pay a landlord incentive fee because there was a difference in the fair market rent by $160 a month. So times 12 months was $1,920. We actually paid the landlord that landlord incentive fee. And we were lucky to negotiate with the landlord on the $4,600 investment we made. And we put a lease addendum on that said that the family, in essence, paid the $160 difference in FMR for year 2 and year 3. So they were guaranteed there to be for 3 years. But as Julie and Linda will tell you, we can't afford to pay $10,000 to $11,000 for every family to get them into an apartment. So it's very difficult. And I don't know if one of you want to talk about some. Linda, you have this great about organizing and supporting New Jersey statewide rent control.
Sorry, I just want to jump in. I know it's so riveting, but we have about 7 minutes.
Okay, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version then.
Yeah, it's the last one.
almost, I mean, very few towns in New Jersey and certainly Union County have rent control. And what we would like to see is a statewide rent control rate of 3% per year. That at least will kind of stop the bleeding and allow people who are in housing to be able to continue to afford it as we try to create those 250,000 new units that we need. So, please talk to your senators, your assembly people, and kind of push for that, a statewide rent control, because local municipalities are not going to do it. Even in Elizabeth, I mean, we lost the $20 cap. So if you're renting a $2,000 apartment, you're basically, the landlords are now getting 3 times more rent control.
And that 3%,
very important. The city planning board meetings to ensure fair share housing plans. As you know, Fair Share Housing sued the state for the regarding the
Mount Laurel.
Mount Laurel bill because it was not being enacted anymore. And so towns must create a plan and enact it to create fair, and affordable housing in their own municipality. And so you should be going to or paying attention to what your planning board is doing, because otherwise they will look for ways to not do it or to stonewall it. And it's really important to ensure that they do that. Many towns have already done it. I know Union, Summit, off the top of my head, Cranford, Garwood are all building affordable housing, but you need to really check to see what your town is doing.
And I do think that we all have to adopt a housing first policy or housing first philosophy. And of course, housing first philosophy, that's getting people housing first and then put the supportive services in afterwards. But of course, that only works with a healthy, robust stock of affordable low-income housing. But it is something we should adopt. Julie?
And, just adding a little bit to what you guys were saying, having that, I can hear that thing again. Okay. Helping our population with that 3% when it comes to landlords and rents is going to give them a space to do other things. It's not only about, it's not only about the rent. We want to make sure that people are able to save for the future, that they are able to do other things that is going to help them, is going to help their children, not, only paying rent and having that income to pay rent.
Absolutely.
Hi, I just want to jump in. There are several comments and questions, and we have just.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Gabrielle.
Sorry, no, I'm saying there are a few minutes left and there are several questions and comments in the chat.
See if I can see the chat.
Do you want me to just read them out?
If you can, please, I cannot.
The first is from Janet Dixon. She's saying it's also the fact that you cannot get Section 8 if your family owned the property. We can go one by one if that works.
You mean because you can't pay landlord can't be a family member? That's what they're saying, right?
Yes, I think so.
That's what it looks like. Yep. She said yes.
Where's the next question?
The next question was a comment from Sandra Barnett saying the Biden admin just released a statement taking new actions to boost housing affordability and availability via CNN.
Oh, that's great news. I hope that's something that really pans out.
We'll see how that translates in the trenches.
Janet then commented or asked, can you give more information on the home sharing?
Yes, the home sharing is a nonprofit. We can send all this out afterwards too, because we will share the SharePoint and the PowerPoint. So all these points, and we can put information about home sharing and other things too. And it's a wonderful nonprofit. It's based in Somerset County, but it serves Union County. It serves 5 or 6 counties, I believe. And it works really well, as Linda said, for seniors who own their own home, and it's a little unaffordable, and they're actually feeling alone. And then she or she goes to home sharing, and they vet her, and then they vet the people that are looking for a place to stay. And oftentimes they match up people, like maybe another 50 to 60-year-old person who is in a homeless situation, and then they go to home sharing and share a home with the person who is the homeowner. It's a win-win for everyone. everybody. And they'll take some families in too. It's a very low, they keep the rent very low for the person that's moving in to share the home. And sometimes I know they've actually exchanged services. If it was a younger person that moved in with an older person and they needed to go bring them shopping and driving them places. So they do some bartering too, but if you, we'll send that out to you, the information.
The next question is coming from Sandra. I work with the Union County Board of Elections and the mayor of New Providence came in to vote. I asked him why New Providence didn't have the 4% rent cap. He told me it was because New Providence did not have Section 8 housing.
I don't think that's related. The rent control in New Jersey it cannot be unconscionable. Most judges feel that that's between 10 and 15%. So, you know, there is no statewide actual limit of rent control. It's only what a judge would deem unconscionable, and that goes from judge to judge. What we're really advocating for is a 3% cap all through New Jersey.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, Jolene, and Julie, for your presentation. It was very informative. We will take a 5-minute break now and reconvene at 2:46.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.